I want to give you a closer look at how Google Analytics collects data so you can really unlock all of its power. The data collection process begins with that snippet of JavaScript code that you have installed on every page of your site that you're tracking. And this code monitors every interaction from users to your website. Now, out of the box, this works really well, but you can push beyond the basics and control when this tracking code is triggered and what information is passed along with it. And this allows you to track more than just page views. Most commonly, you can track pages, events, e-commerce transactions, and social interactions. We call each activity that is recorded a hit, and each hit is then packaged up and sent over to Google Analytics. And we call this package a payload. Each payload must contain a hit type, and each hit type has its own set of required fields, essentially the insights that you want to pass along. And each hit will also include all of the basic insights, things like the language of the user's browser, the page name that they're on, and the screen resolution of their user's device. In essence, the payload carries all of the insights. Let's say that we have a video on our homepage, and we want to track when people watch it and how much of it they actually watch. Once we configure our analytics tag properly, it would send a payload from our site to Google Analytics that looks something like this. If you look closely, you'll see lots of parameters attached to this payload. I'll go ahead and highlight the most common ones. Now, the tracking script takes care of creating this payload. You, of course, aren't doing this manually, but it's helpful to understand what goes on under the hood. Let's break these down. For starters, we saw some common parameters. Our document location, or DL, sends the full URL of the page on which that content being viewed resides. DR is document refer, and this specifies which referral source brought traffic to that website. The document title is really just the title of the page that the interaction is taking place on. Now, moving along, we see additional insights. Our screen resolution, and then we have the viewport size, which really is the viewable area of the browser or device. So a user can make their browser smaller, and you can see what they're seeing. The tracking ID is essentially the Google Analytics property ID where the data is being stored. From here, we have the specific event hit type. Each hit type is required, and the hit type will have optional fields as well as required fields. In this case, we're going to send along an event category, which we labeled as video, and you can assign whatever you'd like in this field. We also then have our event action. In this case, the user has hit play. And then you have the ability to assign custom dimensions and custom metrics. Each dimension will have an associated index, and you can have up to 20 in the free version. In this case, we've used the index number 1. So custom dimension 1 maps to custom metric number 1. In this case, we've assigned it to view completion, and if the metric triggered 50, then I would assume that the user made it halfway through the video. Now, you can see all of the parameters that are available in Google's Measurement Protocol Parameter Reference. You can explore this document to see everything that's available to you. The easiest way to find it is just do a Google search for it. You also can play around with the actual hits that are being built using Google's Hit Builder. Also, do a Google search for that. And here you'll have the ability to play with various parameters and see whether the hit would be valid and how it appears to Google. As you look to introduce more data into your analytics, you'll handle that programmatically. So if you aren't ready to do the programming yourself, knowing what's possible is still incredibly important so that you can work with a developer to implement what you want. Knowing how all this works enables you to think outside the box when it comes to what insights you want to capture. When a user arrives on a page with your tracking code, Google Analytics creates a random, unique ID that gets associated with the user's browser cookie. And here's how this looks. I'm on Google's merchandise store, and at the bottom of the screen, I have opened the Google Analytics Debugger tool. And this tool allows me to read the payload of data being sent to Google. And here we can see our client ID labeled as CID. Now remember the last few numbers here, 44200. Let's go ahead and move to another page. I'll select a product. We'll reload that page. And here we can see that our CID stays the same, 44200. Now, if I close the browser and come back later, I'll still have that same CID. However, if I open an incognito window, which starts out with no cookie data, I will not. Analytics considers every unique ID to be a unique user. So whenever a brand new ID is detected, Google Analytics will count that record as a new user, and it sends the hit over as such. But when Analytics detects an existing ID, it then sends a returning user value alongside that hit. Now, there are a couple of limitations here. Because Analytics is using browser cookies to determine whether a user is unique, then the information is lost if a user ever eliminates or clears the cookies on their browser, or if they use, as we said earlier, an incognito window. So essentially, you have the ability to track the same user across multiple sessions so long as the session is happening on the same browser on the same device. If your user moves across different devices or changes browsers, they're going to get a new unique ID. The only way to track users across devices is to use user ID. Hopefully, this helps demystify a little bit about how new versus returning users works in Google Analytics. One of the limitations with Google Analytics is that as soon as a user leaves the browser and switches over to their mobile device, but continues to interact with your website, you lose that association. Google will assign that record as a new user, even though it's the same person. You can get around this problem by using Google's user ID, and this essentially allows you to associate one or more sessions across multiple devices with one unique and persistent ID that you've created. Now, the caveat here is that you must be able to generate your own unique ID. You'll have to assign that ID to a user and be able to identify whenever that user appears. This typically is done when you have a site that people log into. So if I were to log into your service or into your e-commerce platform, you now know who I am, and you can associate my record across the devices that I log in as. So you will have to use a programmatic solution to attach a unique user ID back to that Google Analytics record. Now, I'm not going to get into the in-depth particulars of how to use user ID. I simply want to make you aware that it's available so that you can do a little bit of research into whether or not it fits your tracking needs. Views are the workhorse of any Google Analytics power user. Views are a subset of the analytics property, and they allow you to apply unique configuration settings and filters. So they not only help you work faster, but they give you ways to look at your data differently, which can help unlock tremendous insights. Now, any data that you send into your Google Analytics property will then be associated to all of the views. You can then use filters to only see a subset of data. Now, if you've set up your Google Analytics property according to the best practices, you'll have at least 3 views: a raw data view, a test view, and your master view. Now, the raw data view is used always as an unfiltered view. It's a safeguard in case you've applied any filters to a view incorrectly, and then you see that you have an issue with your data. You use the test view as a place to trial new ideas, new filters, and so on. It's your playground. It's never used to actually pull real reports from. And then your master view. And this is set up with the minimum set of filters applied to conduct your business and pull your reports. Now, you'll want views beyond this. It's just important that you have these 3 established so you can always fall back on these buckets. Now, when you create a property in Google, by default, you're only going to have one view, and that's all website data. So it's really important that you create additional views. And beyond the 3 that I showed you, you might want to create a view that filters out just to your target market. Say you only sell in Canada. You can exclude the rest of the globe. You may create a view specific to a traffic source, say organic search only, which you then use primarily for your SEO research. And you can even have views by a specific subdomain or a folder, say your blog or your storefront, or even a view by device, say just mobile phones. You can have up to 25 views, and they are essential as you look to optimize your workflow and take your analytics skills to the next level. In order to guide the data that you need to be collecting in analytics and the ways that you'll be pulling reports, as well as any filters or features that you set up, you need a clear measurement strategy for your business. So you want to take some time to define your business objectives and how you expect to measure your outcomes. Now, there are key actions that users take on your website that push them towards your business objectives. These could be something like making a purchase, which would be considered a macro conversion. Macro conversions represent the broad goals of your company. But then there are small goals that help bring that user closer and closer to that main event. These are called micro conversions, and this could be anything that supports moving that user to that macro conversion. Now, every business naturally has different types of conversions. For example, macro conversions might look like purchasing a product, someone starting a free trial, or maybe simply filling out a lead form. Micro conversions, which again help push towards that macro conversion, could look like a subscription to a newsletter, someone simply watching a video, or maybe somebody clicking to engage a live chat with a sales agent. Now, once you've defined your macro and micro conversions, you can start putting together your measurement plan. And this is how you begin to align those objectives with what you'll be setting up in Google Analytics. And your measurement plan will include your business objectives, the strategies and tactics that are going to support that objective, your key performance indicators. These are what you're measuring on the success of those strategies and the tactics that you've applied, as well as the segments that'll help you understand what's driving success. So you may need to segment your market activities as well as your users. And then finally, the KPI targets. This is the number that you're trying to reach to understand if your business is reaching its goals. To show you an example of what this plan can look like, I've gone ahead and pulled up an example from Google's help articles, and this is for the Google Merchandise Store. Here we can see they've created their business objective, the strategy, and they've created some columns for their tactics, which include the key performance indicators, essentially the metrics for each, as well as subpoints for all of those KPIs. And then we see the segments, which they're mapping to dimensions here towards the bottom. Once you have an idea of where you're going and what you're measuring, you'll be better prepared to configure Google Analytics in a more advanced and robust manner. Let's take a look at how we create a new view for an existing property in our account. Now I'm here on the Analytics dashboard, and I'll start by selecting Admin in the lower left-hand corner. Now, you control a lot of what's going on in Analytics right here in the Admin view. In the first column, we see our account. In the middle column, our property, and on the far right column, our view. To create a view, we need to start by selecting the account that we're interacting with. In this case, I'll choose this demo account that I've set up. Next, we need to confirm the property that we're creating the view for. Now, I only have one property, so I'll go ahead and keep that selected. And from the final column, we'll select Create View. The first thing that we'll select is the type of data that we're tracking, whether it's a website data or mobile app data. Now, all types of data can be sent to either view. However, there's some subtle nuances in how Google interacts with that data, as well as the type of hit data it's expecting. So if you're primarily tracking insights from your website, keep that one selected. Next, we need to give the view a name. And it's important that you use a specific and descriptive name, as you want to be able to tell what data is in this view when you're picking from a list. Let's say that we were creating a view just for organic data. Let's say I'm using this for SEO reporting. I can go ahead and give it that name. Next, we'll select the reporting time zone. You have the ability to select the country as well as the specific time zone. Now, I'd like to point out that the time zone only affects how data is showing up within the view, not how it's collected. For example, I'm in the Los Angeles time zone. This means that if I have this set, the beginning and the end of each day is calculated based on Pacific time here in LA, regardless of whether a visitor is in, say, Florida or in another country, say China. Now, whenever you create a view, the time zone is only going to affect data moving forward. It is not applied retroactively. So if you come in and edit your view and change your time zone, it's only going to impact that data moving forward. From here, I'll select Create View. Now, in the right-hand column, we should be able to select the view from the dropdown. Here we have our default all website data, and now we see our organic data view. And if I select the menu in the upper left-hand corner, we should also see the view appear in the Views pane here. To toggle between views, you can simply select the view that you'd like to see, and you'll be within that view. It's really quite straightforward to set up a view. After you've created a view, you'll want to edit its settings, and you'll do this from the admin view, which to confirm You get to by selecting the gear icon in the bottom left-hand corner. You'll confirm the account that you're in and the property, and then you'll select the view that you'd like to interact with from the drop-down menu on the right-hand side. Here we're going to be changing the organic data view settings, and then I'll select view settings from the menu options. For starters, we have the ability to edit the view name and then confirm the website URL. And you'll want to toggle whether that's HTTP or HTTPS. You have the time zone, which was set when you created the view. And again, you can change this. However, it will not impact your data retroactively. It only affects it moving forward. Next, we have the default page. And what this does is it allows you to let Google know if your website serves the same default page, whether someone goes to say yoursite.com or yoursite.com/index.html. Now, Google will tell you that you should add index.html here if it matches the same as just the /. However, I encourage you to leave this blank. Whatever you put in this field becomes appended to every URL with that /. It's better to instead use a filter to remove any instances of index.html or index.php and so on. Instead, use a filter to control what you'd normally put in that slot. Next, we have the ability to exclude URL query parameters. If you're unfamiliar, the query parameters are part of that string that appears after the question mark in a URL. And this is usually how certain data points are passed back and forth. Now, in this case, I have an example of a checkout page that has the parameters transaction as 123 and the ID as ABC. In this instance, our key is the TXN or the ID, and the value of that key, which comes after the equal symbol, is 123 or ABC. Now, at any time that a query parameter does not change the content of the page, in other words, the page is always identical, and you don't want to see thousands of query parameters in your Google Analytics view, then you can exclude it. And you'll do that by adding them in this box. So if I wanted to remove those, I'd do TXN, ID, and now Google will automatically exclude these parameters whenever they appear in my URL. Now, if we're dealing with any monetary values, then you can select how you'd like the currency to be displayed, in this case, US dollar, and then you have the ability to exclude all hits from known bots and spiders, which I highly encourage that you leave checked. Beyond this, you can toggle on site search if you're using that. You can hover over the question mark to learn more about site search, and then you simply choose save. Now, you'll have more view settings in Web View than App View, but it's relatively the same, whichever one that you choose. Going beyond your view settings, you'll have the ability to interact with a few more things at the view level. Now, within the view panel, from the admin overview, which again, we got to by selecting the gear icon labeled admin, you have the ability to set user management at the view level, so you can decide who has the ability to see a view. You'll configure goals at the view level. You can manage your content grouping at the view level. And most importantly, you'll be interacting with filters mostly at the view level. One of the most powerful features of views is the ability to filter the information, which changes what you see when you're interacting with that view in your report. So you'll interact with filters right here from within that view panel. And you have a few other things such as channel settings, channel grouping, e-commerce settings, and so on. And then the personal tools and assets are not actually associated to the view level. They just show up in this column. By default, every data point that Google Analytics collects is distributed to every single view and thus every single report, unless, of course, you can filter it. Filters help you refine your data and allow it to be more readable and actionable. There are two types of filters: predefined filters and custom filters. Predefined filters are already created by Google, so they're set up to work right out of the box, and there's very little customization necessary. Then we have custom filters, and these allow you complete flexibility. You can design and create filters to do exactly what you need them to do to make sure that the view that you have set up is only showing the data that's important to your objectives. Now, predefined filters really only manage traffic. And what this means is you'll have the ability to either include or exclude data based on traffic from either the ISP domain, an IP address, subdirectory, or the host name. Now, it is limited in functionality, but it does give you decent flexibility surrounding those traffic parameters. Moving on, we have custom filters. We can start with include and exclude filters, but we go beyond traffic. Instead, we can select a field and create a pattern. And we can do this to say we want to include only mobile users. So we would say for the filter on the device category, we're looking for only data that is mobile. We also have the ability to normalize our data using lowercase and uppercase filters. This can really help make your reports easier to use. Now, by default, Google Analytics data isn't case sensitive. So all the pages in your report might show the same URL multiple times. If sometimes it starts with a capital letter, if sometimes people add in mixed case. So it's helpful to set up lowercase and uppercase filters simply to normalize that data. Moving on, we have search and replace filters, which simply allow you to search for a particular pattern with a field, and then you can replace that pattern with an alternate piece of data. And then finally, advanced filters. And these are really unique. They let you take one or two fields of data, and then you can combine that data in order to construct a third field. This can be really helpful as you identify matching text in order to trigger certain actions. And as you get more comfortable with filters, you can even use regular expressions to manipulate the data. Now remember, you should always be testing your filters out in a test view first before you're creating a new view with them or applying them to any of your other views. When it comes to creating and managing filters, you'll primarily interact with it in the View panel. Here, you'll find filters in the menu options. Once I select filters, I'll have the ability to add a filter by selecting the option in the upper left-hand corner. Now, if I had created any filters, they would appear here. And to show you what that looks like, I'm going to switch accounts. So now when I select filters, I have the ability to see all the filters associated with this view. Now you'll notice that the Add Filter icon has gone away. And that's because I don't have necessary permissions on this user account level to create filters for this view. So if you can't find the Add Filter button, it's likely a permissions issue. Now, one thing I will point out as I go back is under the account level, you have this All Filters view. And what this does is lets you see every filter across all of your views. So here I can see what filters have been created and how many views they're associated with. In this case, the Exclude Product filter is not applied to any views, whereas the Include Host Name and the Rename AdWords Campaigns filters are applied to 3 views. And if I select the filter from this view, as I scroll down, I will see the views that are available to bind this to. And this is how you can take one filter and apply it to multiple views. You can come in here and bind it to additional views. It's relatively straightforward to interact with filters, and you'll spend most of your time doing so right here in the admin panel. If you're interacting with your data using multiple filters, it's important that you know that the order matters. So Google Analytics applies all the filters in order, meaning in this example, Google Analytics is going to start by adding my lowercase filter and then excluding my office traffic. Now, for the most part, the filter order doesn't usually make a difference. However, if you are interacting with the same piece of data, so you're excluding a chunk of data and then you're manipulating that data and you're moving down in an order that matters, if the filters aren't applied correctly, they're not going to work and you're going to have issues with your reporting. The way that you manage the filter order is simple. From the filters option within your view, select Assign Filter Order at the top of the table. From here, simply select the filter and choose whether you want to move it up or move it down. It's important to take a minute to review all of your filters and make sure they're firing in the correct order. As you go to create your filters, it's very common that you'll need to use regular expressions to really get them to do what you want them to do. And regular expressions are most commonly referred to as regex. And this is a language that is used to describe a search pattern. It allows you to use essentially very powerful wildcards. Let's say, for example, that our office had the following IP address range, and we wanted to exclude this range from ever capturing data in Google Analytics. We would write regex, which would look like this. And here's how this breaks down. When we see the slash, this means that the character that comes after that slash needs to be interpreted literally. You see, the period is actually a regular expression for matching any single character. So if we simply left the dots in the IP address, then the regex would use that to match any other character. So we have to use that preceding slash. Now, at the very end, you'll see the D, which is shorthand for any number 0 to 9, the list of numbers from 0 to 9, and then the asterisk means 0 or more of any character. And this will essentially allow us to capture that entire range of IPs in one simple format. Now, regex can get incredibly complicated, and this is by no means meant to be a comprehensive overview. There are plenty of resources right here and around the web to help you get familiar. But I do want to show you the ones that you'll encounter most often and the ones that are really relatively easy to use. The first is the pipe symbol. I use this one very, very often, and this is used to create an OR match. Let's say I'm setting up a filter and I want to include my blog, store, and article directories. I would simply put blog, pipe, store, pipe, article, and now it's going to be blog or store or article. And this is important because sometimes when you create filters, you'll set up a filter for blog, then you'll add a new filter for store. But because filters fire in order, they don't naturally create an OR mechanism. So if I filtered out blog and then I fired another filter for store, store is not going to exist because I've already filtered for blog. So at the very high level, I would create this filter with the OR statement. Next, you can use a caret to indicate that something starts with this word. Let's say I had numerous contact pages. I had a contact-sales, contact-customers, contact-clients, and so on. If I use the caret symbol, contact, it's going to find anything that starts with that term. Contrary to that, I can use a dollar symbol at the end of a term to indicate that I want everything that ends in this word. So let's say I had store-order, contact-order, and so on. I would put the dollar sign, and that would find anything that ends with it. And finally, when you include either letters or numbers in between a bracket with a dash symbol, you're going to create a list. If I had page-AA, page-AB, and so on, I could match that with the following regular expression. Now, this is very touch and go with regular expressions, but these are the ones that you encounter most commonly. The first and most common filter that you'll likely set up with your Google Analytics account is a predefined filter to remove the traffic that originates from your office. You'll start by selecting filters from the view that you'd like to apply this to. I always start with a test view, verify it works, and then I move it to the correct view. From here, I'll select Add Filter, and then we'll simply make sure that we've selected Create New Filter, and then we'll give this a name. Predefine is selected by default, and then you'll have options under filter type to exclude or include only. We'll start by selecting exclude, and from the source or destination, you have 4 options. In this case, we're excluding all traffic from the IP address. ISP domain would be if you are at a large institution and your company acts as its own internet service provider. Then we can select the expression. In this case, we don't have to write our own regular expression. Google is helping us do this through the predefined filter. So we can choose whether we want an IP address that's equal, that begins with, that ends with, or that contains. If we wanted to do a range, we would simply select that begins with, and we could do something like this. Then any IP address that started with these 3 points would be included. If you only had one IP address, you could make it equal to and select the IP address of your office. Now, I'm using a generic IP address here. You'd have to go and identify the exact IP or the exact IP range that you're using. Now, if you have a fairly complicated setup, for example, perhaps your IP addresses do not follow a predefined pattern, then you have the option of either adding multiple exclude filters or selecting custom and then using an exclude filter, selecting the IP address field, and then using a regular expression pattern to create that filter. Once you've set it up, simply choose Save. And just like that, we have our exclude office traffic filter using the predefined settings within Google Analytics. Let's look at a common exclude filter. I'll go ahead and select Add Filter from the view that I'd like to apply this to, and we're going to give this a name. I'm going to call this Exclude Staging Traffic. Let's say, for example, that we have our site set up in a staging environment where we make all of our tests, and then we deploy it. And perhaps we use the same Google Analytics tag on the staging site, and so we're getting erroneous traffic in our reports. We could exclude that. We'll start by selecting Custom from the filter type, and from the filter field, we're going to select Hostname from the dropdown. Now we need to create our filter pattern using a regular expression. Let's say that we have two sites, one at dev.oursite.com and one at stage.oursite.com. We'll start by creating the first. I'll use the caret and dev, and the caret indicates that dev will be at the start of the string. We then need to use a slash because when we use that period, it needs to indicate that we want that period to be treated literally, not the period that can be used as a regular expression. We'll put our site, again, the slash before the dot, com, and a $sign to indicate that .com is at the end of the string. And then I'll use a pipe as the or, and we'll do it again for stage. And just like that, we now have an exclude filter to remove any staging traffic from appearing in our reports. Now you'll notice that Google provides a nice little help feature, and you can use this if you need any help with regular expressions. Next, you can verify the filter, which will help you understand how it's going to impact the data. In this case, it's saying it's not going to make any changes to my data, and that's simply because there's no data in this test view. However, you can use this to identify whether you've set up the regular expression correctly or if you need to make some tweaks. Once you're ready, choose Save. Let's take a look at creating include filters. So I'm already here in the Add Filter wizard, and I'm going to skip filter name and just focus on filter type. Let's start by selecting Custom, and then we'll choose Include from the options that appear. And let's say, for example, we want a view that only shows us mobile traffic. From the Field drop-down menu, I'll do a search for Device, and if I scroll to the bottom, I should see Device category. And once I select that, Google makes it easy and gives us a drop-down menu, so we don't need to know the exact category to type in for our field match. In this case, I simply select Mobile, and then I would choose Save. Another common include filter is to create a view that is only for a particular directory. Let's say, for example, we only want to look at data for our blog. I'll select Predefined from the filter type. I'll choose Include Only from my dropdown. We'll choose Traffic to the subdirectories, and then we simply need to add in blog. Now, one final common include filter is to include only traffic from the country that you're targeting. Let's say, for example, we really only do business in Canada. I can go back to the include, and I can select from the dropdown, and instead search for country. Now we have two options. We can search for the e-commerce transaction country, which is specific to if you're using this with an e-commerce setup, or globally the country. I'll select country, and here we need to type in how the country appears. Now, a common way to evaluate what you need to insert in this filter pattern box is to go simply look at the data in Google Analytics. I have another tab open here, and if I select geography from the option on the left and location from the menu dropdown, we can see all of the countries here. In this case, here's how Canada appears. If I needed to do United Kingdom, I would make sure that I type it as it appears here. As you get more familiar with how data looks within Google Analytics, it's easier to know what to insert in your filter patterns. Now, I could get more descriptive by using regular expressions, or I can simply leave it as this and choose Save. It's really that straightforward to set up your include filters. I believe every Google Analytics account can benefit from an upper or lowercase filter. All of the data that comes into Google Analytics is case sensitive. And no matter how organized and clean your structure is, it's inevitable that folders end up coming across with different case sensitivity. This tends to happen when someone creates a backlink or someone directly types in a URL and you get mixed case. This creates duplicate records in Google Analytics. And for most websites, case sensitivity doesn't matter, which means you can filter it all out. You can create everything lowercase or make everything uppercase. It's really up to your preference. You do this within the filter creation wizard. You'll select custom and then choose lowercase or uppercase. I'll select lowercase. And from the field, we choose request URI. And just like that, it'll automatically lowercase everything. Now, another area that you might apply this to is your campaign. And you can select from the dropdown whether that's campaign source, campaign medium, and so on. So if you ever have issues with your campaign names coming in with multiple cases, this is another way that you can filter it out. It's relatively straightforward to set up a lowercase or uppercase filter, and I encourage you to apply one to most of your views now. If you'd like to search for a piece of information and then change it before it arrives in Google Analytics, then you want to use a search and replace filter. Here in the filter creation wizard, I'll select custom from filter type, and then we'll choose search and replace. Let's say, for example, that our website is at www.oursite.com, and we want to remove the www from all of our reports. From the filter field, we can select hostname, and then it's as easy as adding in the search string. We'll do the caret and then www, followed by the slash dot. Now, whenever www appears in the host name, if we leave replace string blank, then it'll remove it. The search and replace has a number of uses. For example, you might use it to replace campaigns when you have multiple campaigns that really just need to be aggregated into one campaign. You can also use it to replace common errors or mistakes, or if you see things in your analytics data that you'd like to remove or change, simply use search and replace. As you go about setting up filters in Google Analytics, I want you to keep in mind a few things. First, filters are destructive. This means that when you set them up, all of the incoming hits are permanently modified for that particular view. This is why I recommend that you always keep one unfiltered view of your data so that you'll always have access to that full data set. This is very helpful in case you add a filter that inadvertently changes something you didn't expect to happen. Now, once you set up your filters, they take 24 hours before they're applied to your data. And if you notice that your filters aren't working, it's likely because you haven't waited long enough. So you typically have to wait 24 hours before you see the filters take effect. After 24 hours, if things aren't looking the way that you expect them, then it's time to dig deeper into your setup. And finally, the last thing to keep in mind is that the field specified must exist for the filter to apply. This is very important when you're mapping data. If you select the wrong field, perhaps you're looking for country and you're looking for Canada, but you're using the wrong protocol. You're searching for it under hostname. It's not going to fire. You have to make sure that you're matching the field to the right protocol and that it's specified in the hit data that's coming across from Google Analytics. To really unlock the power of Google Analytics, you're going to want to configure events. Events allow you to collect data across any type of interaction with your content. You might measure things like downloads, link clicks, when someone interacts with various steps in your purchase process or fills out a lead form or even watches a video. All of this information is collected and displayed in easy-to-understand reports. Here, I'm in the Events Overview report, and I got here by selecting Behavior, Events, and then Overview. Now, this data comes from the Google Merchandise Store, which is simply sample data that we can interact with. Now, it's important that I mention that events have to be set up programmatically. You'll configure code on your website in order to trigger events that will show up in Google Analytics. Now, events are composed of their category and their action. These are required to trigger an event. And here we see the event category Enhanced E-commerce, as well as Contact Us. And if I select the event action, we can see the actions that were defined for these various events. In this case, add to cart, remove from cart, a product click, and so on. You also have the ability to assign labels, which are simply helpful to understand the context. In this case, Google has applied labels to each product. And then you have the ability to add a value. In this case, you may trigger the monetary value of this event action, or perhaps the value of, say, what percentage a user has completed a video view. And what's great is within these reports, we can extract a lot of data. If I select top events here on the left-hand side, I can see the top events by category, and we can select into that category to get a more specific view. And here I can see the event actions that took place. And if I bring in a second dimension, say event label, we can really begin to get a quick look at what's going on. Here I can see all the quick view clicks for each of these events. And I can see that removing from cart and adding to cart does not have any labels set, which may indicate to me that I have a problem with the way that I configured this. You can also view events by pages. Here I've selected the pages report, and we can see the total events that are taking place on each page. And this is helpful as we can understand where the majority of our actions are taking place. And of course, you always have the ability to bring in secondary dimensions to drill deeper and deeper into these insights. Events help you get a more granular view of what your user is doing, and they're incredibly important to every measurement campaign. As you begin to capture events data, you'll really want to unlock the understandings of what's going on with your user behavior. And you can do this using the Events Flow report. You'll find this by selecting Events Flow in the menu on the left-hand side under the Events heading within Behavior Reports. Now, this chart allows us to visualize the order in which users triggered various events. And this is helpful as we can understand what events are keeping users engaged and see the paths they take from one event to the next. This also helps us understand common questions. We can identify if there's an event that's always triggered, if one event leads to more events, or maybe we can see if certain events are more popular on particular campaigns. Now, some things that you can use when navigating this flow, in the upper left-hand corner, you can choose the level of detail. So if it's real noisy, you can choose to show fewer connections or even more. You also can identify whether you want to see everything, category, action, and label, or simplify and simply see category and action. Along the left-hand side, you can change the size of the cards. And then in the upper left-hand corner, we can choose our starting filter. In this case, we have country, but let's say we want to look at this by source. Now we can see the events by each source. And if I select on Google, I can choose highlight traffic through here and focus only on that source and the events that take place. If I hover over an event, we can see some insights. Here I see 68% of the traffic moves through and 31% of the traffic ends on this event. In other words, they took no additional events after this. If you'd like, you can also remove events simply by choosing the X icon next to them. And then you can choose the plus icon to add a step. And you can move through that by adding additional events. Once you understand how users are interacting with the way that you've set up your events, you can leverage this to really understand deeper insights on your user engagement and use this to improve your flows. For the most part, adding Google Analytics events to your site requires some development work. Here I'm in the Google Analytics developer documentation for events, and you'll see that it does require modifying the tags and adjusting when things are sent to Google. In this case, you have to configure an event command, which sends an action and a category, and also, if you'd like, a label and a value. Now, this can be done programmatically a number of ways, and I'm not going to get into specifically how to do this. This documentation is available, and you can likely work with a developer, if you're not one yourself, to sort this out. Now, some e-commerce platforms automatically include the ability to track events, and it can be configured automatically from within those, as well as certain WordPress plugins that can deliver this feature to your website. Another way to bring events to your site is through Google Tag Manager. Now, I'm not going to get into how to set up Google Tag Manager, but you can find resources right here to do that. Google Tag Manager allows you to trigger various events based on what it sees happening on your website. You're able to do this in a less programmatic way. So you'll set up Tag Manager, you can create various triggers, and you can fire events right into Google Analytics. I encourage you to evaluate what solutions are available to you, but keep in mind that adding events is absolutely imperative for just about any website on the internet. I think it's important to understand when to use goals and when to use events so that you can get the most out of the way that you're setting up Google Analytics. Now, goals are configured under the view. And here, if I select goals in the view panel within our admin settings, we can see a variety of goals that have been set up for the Google Merchandise Store. Now, goals tend to be things that substantially impact your bottom line. This is something that really moves the direction of your business. Events tend to be all of these micro interactions that help move someone towards a goal. With an event, we might measure when someone signs up for our newsletter or watches our video, whereas a goal might track when someone has completed a purchase or finalized a registration or has become an engaged user. We can use goals to really understand whether we're accomplishing what we've set out to do with a particular marketing campaign. Now, there's a few different types of goals, and you likely might be using them now, but I thought I'd run through a quick refresher. So here we see an engaged user goal. And if I select this, I can show you how it's been set up. In this case, they've selected a custom template. They've created a pages and screens per session goal. And then within the details, they've decided that when a user views more than 10 pages per session, this goal has been completed and that user is now engaged. We also have a purchase completed goal. In this goal, we can see that it's a destination goal, meaning someone has hit a particular page. Within the goal details, we can see that when the destination is ordercompleted.html, this goal is complete. The funnel has been enabled, and the funnel allows you to identify the steps that a user takes in order to arrive at that goal. And this is helpful so that you can see this in your funnel visualization. Here, a user goes from the cart to billing and shipping to payment to review. Now, this is fairly straightforward to set up and configure, but it's important that you think about how you can be using goals and how you can be using events. So as you look at setting up your Google Analytics account, consider that goals are going to be a destination, a duration, a page per session, or triggered by a particular event, and they're aligned to your KPIs. In other words, these are metrics of success. These goals align with your overarching mission, and your events are everything that helps someone move towards that goal. You want to differentiate and distinguish between these because as you view reports, you're going to interact with this data in a way that changes how you evaluate user behaviors. One of the most powerful ways to understand what users are doing is to see what they're searching for. When you know what a user is searching for, you have a good idea of what their intent is, and you'd have a good understanding of whether you were able to meet it. So I'm on the Google Merchandise Store, and let's say we do a search for backpacks. I'll go ahead and search for backpacks here, and let's see what comes up. So Google's done a pretty good job at showing us, well, exactly what we searched for. Here, I've got some backpacks. Now, Google has set up a feature within Google Analytics called Site Search. And in fact, the very store that we looked at is configured so we can see the data that's coming through. I'm in the Site Search report, which I got to in the Behavior section, and I've selected Overview. Right away, we can see all of our sessions with search, how many unique searches there were, as well as some additional data. But what we're most interested in is these search terms. And you can see an overview here, or you can select search terms from the navigation on the left-hand side. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Right away, we can see what our most popular search terms are. And in this case, it's gopher. Now, if we had no products related to this search term, we'd want to figure out why people are searching for this and what we can do to capture on this behavior. Now, where it gets more powerful is you can layer in your goal sets alongside your search terms. So here we can see that the search term gopher has really resulted in 0 purchase completions. And if I sort our purchase completed goal, we can see that the only search term that really results in any purchases is Nexus. And so this really helps paint a picture of what's going on. I can understand right away that our website is not meeting the intent of our users. They're searching for Gopher and they're not buying anything. Now you can navigate this even further by looking at search pages. Here we can see the start pages where most people are doing this search. If you identify that a lot of searches are happening from a particular page, then you might have an indication that that page either is not answering the question or it has inspired curiosity and people are pursuing more insights. Another interesting query that you can see, I'm going to go back to search terms. Let's say we're looking at the speaker's search term. Here we can see it's been searched 26 times. It's resulted in one page view. So 84% of the searches have left. And there is this column that has 0%, but this is search refinements. And this is helpful if, say, someone typed in speakers. That will show you how many times they've refined that search, which can be really helpful in understanding the way that people think. Site search is incredibly powerful, and it's definitely worth setting up if you have a search feature on your website. Setting up site search is relatively straightforward. If your site has a search feature and the search results are visible in the URL after the search query, in this case, I did a search for backpacks, and we can see that the keyword appears here twice, actually, both as a key and keyword, then you can configure site search with relative ease. Site search is configured at the view level. So I'll start in the admin panel. And then we need to select the account that we'll be interacting with. Confirm the property, and then choose the view that you'd like to add this to. From here, select View Settings, and then we'll scroll to the bottom of the view and we'll turn Site Search Tracking on. It's here that Google is asking us for our query parameter. This is that parameter that you see in the URL whenever the user made the search on your site. In this case, our query parameter is keyword. So we simply navigate back and enter in that query parameter. Now you can enter a comma and enter up to 5 parameters. In this case, we also saw that key was used. Now those are duplicate, so I don't need to use both. You also have the option to strip the query parameters out of the URL. And this eliminates any duplicate data from your report. So I encourage you to enable that. Next, you have the option to enable site search categories. If you have categories on your site, in other words, search might happen in a variety of categories. Perhaps you have apparel, and you have men's apparel, women's apparel, kids' apparel, and so on. You might turn on site search categories, in which case you'd then enter in the parameter that defines the category. In this case, there is no site search category, so I can leave that off and simply choose Save. Once you've set up site search, the new metrics appear in Site Search Reports under the Behavior tab. Site search is relatively easy to set up, as you can see, and it offers tremendous insights into your users' behavior. As you navigate Google Analytics, you're essentially interacting with dimensions and metrics. In this report, the dimensions are the country, and a related metric would be, say, the number of sessions. And this is really beneficial. And out of the box, Google has a tremendous number of dimensions that really help you understand what's going on with your marketing. However, there are times when it's helpful to collect data that's custom specifically to your business. And this is done through what are called custom dimensions. Essentially, you add a tracking code on your site, and then you can indicate the data that you want to send along as an additional parameter directly into Google Analytics. For example, in this sample data, Google has applied a sales region as a custom dimension. If I bring in this custom dimension, I'm able to see the sales region that's been associated with a specific country. And what this does is it allows Google to pull reports based on sales region. So now you can aggregate all of your acquisitions, all of your goals, and so on up into that sales region custom dimension. Custom dimensions are set in the admin interface. And you'll find them under the property view. Once I select custom dimensions, we can see all of the custom dimensions that have been set up specific to this account. Here we can see a variety of custom dimensions as well as their state. Now you'll notice that each custom dimension has a scope, and the scope determines how the data is associated with a particular custom dimension value. There are 4 levels of scope: product, hit, session, and user. The most common scopes are hit and session. A hit is a value that you assign to a single hit. Once a hit happens, the value gets assigned. Whereas a session will assign a value to every hit. So regardless of each individual hit, the value that you assign applies to the entire session. Now, custom dimensions can really unlock a tremendous amount of power out of Google Analytics. However, they are fairly complicated to set up. I've gone ahead and pulled up the developer guide for the custom dimensions and metrics. It's here that you can really get into the nuances of how this works. We don't have enough time together to really go through all of this, but as you can see, you have the ability to send custom data and associate it with a custom metric. This is a really powerful resource, and I encourage you to explore it further to see if it makes sense for your business goals. Google Analytics has a plethora of data. However, there are still many scenarios when you're looking for a specific metric and it just doesn't exist. And this is because you have to calculate that metric. For example, perhaps you're interested in understanding the average revenue per user, or maybe you want to know the average number of page views by users on an iPhone. This can actually be handled using Google's new Calculated Metrics feature. And you'll get to that feature from the admin panel and by selecting Calculated Metrics under the View panel. We'll start by selecting New Calculated Metric. So let's say we want to calculate the average revenue per user. We'll go ahead and give it a name. Google's automatically going to create an external name in case we need to pull that metric via an API. And then from here, we need to choose our format type. This can be float, integer, currency, time, or percentage. Now, float stands for floating point number, and that's the number that has any digits after the decimal. An integer would be a whole number. Currency means the output will be expressed in a dollar amount, and you can choose what currency it is. Time is, of course, a time measure, and then percent would show up in the percentage format. We'll go ahead and leave this as float, and then we get to create our formula. So we simply start typing the metric we're looking for. In this case, let's look for revenue. I can see revenue, and then we can divide that by using the / symbol, and then look for the user's metric. And then from there, we simply choose create. And now we have our average revenue per user metric. Let's see how we can pull this metric in a report. I'm going to switch to an account with some data in it. And then I'll select Custom Reports from the Customization menu. And I'll choose New Custom Report. Here we'll select to Add Metric. And if I do a search for revenue, I can see revenue per user in the other column, which is the custom calculated metric I've created. And then we'll add a dimension. Let's say we're interested in which source is driving the most valuable users. I'll choose Save. And now we can see our revenue per user by each source that's sending traffic. Custom calculated metrics are incredibly valuable, and you'll really unlock the power as you explore all of the features of custom reporting. I'm here in the Channels report, and I got here by selecting Channels from under All Traffic within the Acquisition reports. It's here that we can see all of our channel groups, like organic search and affiliates. And channel groupings are essentially rule-based groupings of your traffic sources. So there's a rule that Google applies automatically that says this search engine belongs in organic search. And it helps because you don't need to go out and manually add every single search engine into a group. Google simply applies the rule automatically at a system level. Affiliates is configured such that when you enter partners as your UTM source, it automatically appears in this bucket. Now, channel groups are incredibly helpful because it lets you look at data across a large channel so you can understand how your campaigns are influencing things from a high level. But it's very likely that you'd like to customize how Google Analytics groups channels or even create channel groups of your own. And to do that, we'll start by selecting Admin in the lower left-hand corner. We'll then switch to the account that we're interested in working on. And then from under the View panel, I'll select Channel Settings. And then channel grouping. I'll select default channel grouping, and this allows us to see how the default channel groups are set up. We can see they're all system defined, and if I select edit next to social, you can see that the rule is the system defined channel matches social. Now, I will point out, Google is quick to let you know that any edits that you make to the default channel grouping will change how your traffic is classified. If you'd like to change the channel groups without changing any of the actual data, you can create a new channel group. And you do that simply by selecting custom channel grouping here on the left-hand side. So for starters, you can add rules. So within social, you can say the system defined channel matches this, and then you can add in an additional rule, or you can change it to an or. If you'd like to remove the rule, simply select the minus icon. You also have the ability to change the color, and then simply select done if you want to save those changes. Now let's say we want to create a new channel and call this one influencer. Let's say, for example, we do a lot of campaigns with influencers, and we always set the custom UTM source to contain influencer. Here we can simply select source contains influencer, set the color, and choose done. And now whenever the source matches influencer, it'll automatically aggregate into that bucket, which allows us to view it at the channel grouping level, which is slightly different than viewing it at the campaign level. And furthermore, you can layer in more and more sources to aggregate into these custom channels. Channel groupings really allow you to further unlock and customize Google Analytics to fit your specific needs.